Episode 3 is somewhat of an extension of the previous episode. A lot of these scenes were originally planned to be in Episode 2, but it was just too much all at once, so we held off on most of the Lucan and Abigail introduction until now. We did make sure that between all the character introductions and exposition, we're still getting some of the more exciting and dramatic moments. Hello again, David here, director of Songs of War, bringing you the behind-the-scenes video for Episode 3. Right away, we meet Eddie, who's a fun character. He's a kind of different silly than Hawken was, mostly from drinking whatever is in all of his potion bottles. His design was actually based partially off the voice actor, who's one of my longest-standing voice actors. There are a few subtle details on his design that fit his character, such as his right sleeve being rolled up to avoid spilling on his arm, and he's also missing one of his boots, as if he just lost it or something. He just has a sock instead. If you listen closely, you can even hear that his footstep sounds take this into account.
All my life, and boy, I'll tell you.
And then we're introduced to the Undead. If we're making a Minecraft animated series, it just wouldn't be right without including the Undead as a major part of the story. But we took it and changed it a little. The Undead you're seeing here all have strange glowing white eyes, and the Felden officials mention rumors of necromancers. Initially, I had no plans to design custom zombies, until I started working on this scene and I realized how silly it looked seeing a bunch of zombies wearing Steve clothes. I then set out to make loads of custom skins. I thought it'd be interesting to use the colors from a normal zombie, a husk, and a stray to get a bit more mileage out of each design. So when I made some custom ragged up zombie skin, I could actually turn it into 3 skins. This also helped, I think, with overall zombie variety. The zombie sound design, like most of the Minecraft classic sounds, didn't really hold up when you needed big zombie hordes. Most of the zombie sounds I actually found on Epidemic Sound, which is where we get most of our sounds from. But even after adding all these zombie sounds, something was still missing.
Zombies!
It needed one extra layer to really give it that terrifying sense. What we ended up stumbling across was the sound of a Howler Monkey, which was exactly what we needed.
Zombies!
The cave systems are supposed to be very deep and dangerous in this universe. We got a bit lucky with the caves because we used World Painter to generate the world, which naturally makes these large, cavernous spaces that you see. And then, so soon, we lose another fun sidekick. Eddie had good intentions, but similar to Hawken, he just wasn't really suited or prepared for these dangers. When the undead show up, especially these with the glowing white eyes, you have reason to be afraid. Once again, setting the tone that the enemies of this series are a threat. Eddie's final scream, however, had to be cut short, as the full one just kept going and going. We also meet Sabigail and Am. I almost said Sabigail and Am. We then meet Abigail and Sam. Abigail was a character we had to hold back almost entirely until Episode 3, and now have an opportunity to put her a little more in the forefront. We see her life situation, which is intentionally pretty similar to both Sen and Ria's. They're very different people from different parts of the world, experiencing a similar thing. It's the way they develop from the starting point which will differ, as well as the paths they choose. Sam is her wolf companion, and was something we felt necessary for Abigail. She lives alone, with the exception of her neighbor Mr. Finch, so it seemed essential to have at least someone she could partially interact with. Sam was a name that came from an older machinima of mine, which then carried into my next machinima as a joke, and made it here once again. We tried to be a bit more expressive and personified with him, so he'd be more of a character than a realistic wolf might be. And the leaves, these darn leaves. I love the idea of seeing leaves floating down from the trees. I thought it would really help the place just feel more leafy and beneath all these dense trees, but I kept running into these weird render problems that I just couldn't explain. I ended up only really getting to use them for this one scene and then never again. I guess it was time for them to leave the series. Animating Animals was always a challenge, honestly, due to having more limbs or different movement habits. All new wolf and horse movement cycles had to be made to capture all the different movements and speeds. I tried to make Sam behave a bit like my dog Jill used to, where she'd sometimes just kind of scratch behind her ear, or she'd hear a sound and one of her ears would turn towards it. I made an idle loop for horses as well, where they kind of just graze and eat grass. and their tail occasionally flicks away flies, as horses tend to do. Speaking of animals, this is where I added birds. When doing these stuff along the coast, I really thought having seagulls flying around would add a nice effect. We took a parrot, found a custom seagull texture, made it flap its wings, and then I put it on this big track, and it just sort of goes around and around the track indefinitely. By putting a lot of these around in random orientations, it can really start looking like a flock of seagulls everywhere. I then repurposed this to work for other birds, and this is what led to all the birds flying around Ardonia all the time, which I admit sometimes I get a little bit crazy with. We get another nice travel montage this episode. I'm always looking for opportunities to pass through the wonderful sets. Both times we've done travel montages, I tried to make the path they follow somewhat reasonable. If you're familiar with the world, you won't see them taking like massive detours just so they can pass by a scenic mountain. This was also another moment to have the Songs of War main theme return. The main theme was actually one of the few themes I wrote. It's actually quite a simple melody at its core, but I think it was a good representation of the series. We tried to avoid using this theme, too many times and making it sound repetitive, and instead we only bring it in when there's something about the world of Ardonia itself. I wanted to give a variety of weather and moods during the travel to really show the passage of time. What might have seemed like a day or two in the animation was actually supposed to be at least a week or more. I designed an effect where the snow and clouds are kind of blowing over the top of the mountain, although I'm not sure if anyone even noticed this. We also we see a rainy scene as they're traveling, as they're leaving a town. Initially the torches were lit, but someone pointed out how that didn't make much sense, so I ended up re-rendering them to extinguish them in the rain. This scene where Thalius talks to Sen at night, this was one of my favorite conversation scenes in Season 1. I wanted to capture that feeling when a storm is coming, and you get that where the wind completely stops, all the animals and bugs become quiet. All you really hear is those distant rumbles, and you see flashes in the sky. This really set the perfect mood for the reveal that Thalius was carrying a Prime song. As with the previous episode behind the scenes, I don't want to go too much into detail on the songs yet, but since we were revealed a little bit more this episode, I can give a basic explanation to reduce confusion for those wanting to understand them more. I'll probably do an entire feature on this topic eventually. So there are 4 main categories of songs, which we call the order of the song. Each order has a bit of a different function, such as being offensive or defensive or allowing you to move, like movement-based things. For example, you've seen 3 of the Red Aggressium songs so far, which serve the offensive role. In addition to each order being a different color, each has a very distinct visual look. I started by designing the physical objects and went for different energy effects in each one. I then based the actual usage of the songs around the same energy designs as the object. In fact, many of the elements are just copied and scaled from the smaller physical objects. Now that you've seen a Prime song up close, you may have noticed what makes them stand out from the other songs. At first glance, they actually look quite similar, but the effect on the inside extends off in every direction into infinity, like a hypercube. One of my early designs for the Prime song was based around a tesseract, which is a 4-dimensional cube sort of thing. I actually had a basic test of it working in Blender, but there were a lot of technical reasons why it would have caused problems down the line, so I next pursued the more infinite grid look. It was mentioned that the Prime songs were the most powerful, but not exactly why they're more powerful, which is still to be seen. When it came time to do the sound design for the songs, Dan created an idle sound for each order of songs, as well as various movement sounds. This was something that made them feel a bit more magical and powerful, if they have to create these kind of sounds as they move, as if there's resistance. There was an animation bit here I was really happy with when Lucan comes stumbling back into town at Riverstead. It's easy to just use a simple walk cycle and extend it, but having characters walk and take steps at varying speeds and sort of stumble proved to be a lot more difficult, but I think it turned out nice in the end as he kind of shifts his weight around and his legs shake, and he finally collapses down, revealing the arrows that were in his back. Even the arrows have a bit of animation detail as he falls, they kind of wiggle a little bit. We also had a second opportunity this episode to let the music really carry a scene, which was when Abigail was doing her farming. This was a song that Mark wrote very early on in the project when he was helping sketch up some of the different themes. We did eventually reorchestrate it to keep it consistent with the other tracks, but we preserved the more uplifting yet peaceful sound of it, which I think was nice to hear between all the usual tense and dramatic tracks. The episode ends similar to how episode 2 ended, with a final shot of the egg, but something changes this time and we can see the story moving forward. It's also probably a good time to point out the scavenger hunt in Songs of War. In every episode, there is both a derp and a yi. The derp may be a challenge to find, but you'll always see him holding his fish and waving. The yi is even more challenging, and to be honest, isn't something most people will ever find. I wanted to hide something extremely difficult so that when it's finally discovered, it's like a big deal. It's like, wow, you were the one who found it in episode 3, 4 months after the episode came out. You'll probably want to go full screen max resolution if you ever intend to find the yis. So 1 derp and 1 yi every episode, including these first 3. Keep an eye out, and yes, derp is in the episodes. And that's all for now. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next episode.